Welcome back to Bread Making with Doug. Adventures in bread making, indeed. Today we're going to make a rustic sourdough, and this is a recipe from King Arthur flour that's done well for me before, so we will see if it does again today. Yesterday we took our starter out of the refrigerator where it normally lives, and we fed it, so it went all day and overnight. And it's looking pretty good. Lots of little bubbles. That means you've got active yeast in there, and that's really came up and then settled back down again, so you know it's doing well. In our recipe today, we're going to use salt, yeast, flour, the starter, water, and some malt powder that I add. So I'd like to pre-measure everything so that I don't accidentally add too much into the bowl and then have to take it back out again. Salt today we have 2.5 teaspoons. The malt powder that I use, totally optional. It helps a little bit with the crust and adds a little malty flavor to the bread. That I have a teaspoon, and we're going to measure out our yeast. Now purists will say, oh, this isn't a true sourdough because you're adding extra yeast to it, but for someone who is really getting started with sourdough, this kind of helps make sure that you do get some decent rise out of your dough. So we're going to use 2 teaspoons of that. It's kind of a sliding scale between 1 to 2 depending on what your conditions are. We're pretty cold in the kitchen this week, so that'll help our rise by having a little bit more yeast in it. Okay, what do we need to do? We've got our water that is should be 90 to 95 degrees. It's coming in at 92, so that's good. I've measured out the flour. It calls for 602 grams of white flour. I've used half bread flour and half unbleached all-purpose in that. Again, King Arthur flours because I really like the way they come out. And the only other thing we have to do is to measure our starter, which is 227 grams. So we use our scale, we tear that out back to 0. And as we measure out the starter, you can see what it looks like, 227. Okay, 120, 50. It's already got lots of gluten activity already. Very sticky, but it's 202. I want 27. Okay. It's 230. That looks good to me. Okay, so now we have all of our elements. You can mix it in a bowl. I have a tendency to like using the polycarbonate tubs. They were suggested by Ken Forkish to be able to mix and rise and do everything in the same bowl, and I kind of like that idea. All right, so we had water, yeast. Some recipes will tell you to make sure that you allow your yeast to come alive again by mixing in with the water first. I haven't honestly noticed any difference in mixing it with the water first and then adding everything else, so we're just going to keep rolling that way. Some people say, oh, the salt, which it does, the salt inhibits your growth, and they caution you not to add the salt with the yeast right away, but I haven't ever had a problem with that either. Remember, I'm just me learning my way along here. I'm not a professional by any means, but for friends and family who are trying to learn bread making the way I did and want to have confidence that, yeah, an average person can manage this, that's the way I'm going to present it. Hate wasting anything. All right, so what you want to do with this is mix it well, and then you're going to get it kneaded into a nice ball. You're going to say, well, wait a minute, you're just mixing it in a bowl, and what about the kneading? It would depend. I don't usually pull it all out to knead it. I do what many will say are just folds, by stretching it in the container and folding it over on itself. And I usually end up doing a lot of it by hand, with my hands, but sometimes just getting the wettest part of it started is a little easier. Okay. I'm probably going to pause the video. There are a lot of bread recipes that will talk about auto-lazing or autolyzing, where what you do is you allow some of the flour and water ahead of time for about 20-30 minutes to form gluten and wet mess, if you will, ahead of time without adding the rest of your yeast and whatnot to it. And that's certainly something you could do. Now, if we decided we wanted to actually knead this a little bit more, we really should have floured our board a little better. You don't really want to add too much flour at this point, but you want it to be workable. So if you want to try to knead it and put it back in the container, that's perfectly fine. I'm not someone who is a big deal on kneading or not kneading. There are a lot of no-knead recipes, and frankly, if you're going to make bread, I don't know what the point of not kneading it is. The whole point of working with bread and flour dough is that you get to play around with the dough. And again, I'm certainly not professional about this. When I watch various other videos and instructions, it seems like I'm not really very good at all, but you really just want to make sure you've mixed the ingredients together really well. And again, just my opinion. Sometimes I'll do sort of a roll and tuck this way, where I'm pulling it around with my fingers, stretching it. Okay, so we're going to put that back in our container, and we're going to let it sit probably about 90 minutes with this one, because it has the sourdough in there and it has the extra yeast in it. We want to make sure it's warm. Excuse me. We want to make sure it's warm, so I will put it on my little bread pillow that I made, which has flaxseed in it. I heat that for about 1.5 minutes in the microwave, so it gives it a nice warm base. The other thing that I like about these tubs is you can pretty well check where your rise is going to be for a doubling and whatnot, and I'll usually put a little post-it note or these little tabs on there, maybe mark where I started and use it to gauge what doubling will be. And we'll be back with you after 90 minutes or so when it's doubled. Our dough has now doubled in size in the container. So we're going to, it went from about here, we're almost up to about there. We're going to take it out, divide it, shape it, and put it in proofing bowls. Now, that first rise for dough is called your bulk ferment, and it's where you get the biggest rise and doubling in your dough. Okay, to get it out of the container, if you had it in a bowl, you at this point might have been able to just tip it out of the bowl. If it's in one of these tubs, again, you want to just ease it out without deflating much of it. But, of course, that's going to happen. Okay, now we're out. Didn't leave very much in there. That's good. It might need, I usually kind of sprinkle some more flour over it, the sticky part of it. Not too much, but hey, we mostly, at this point you can give it a little stretch and fold, but not too much with this one. Shape it up a little bit. We're going to divide it in half. Use your bench knife to cut through it if you have one. Otherwise, you could just use a basic knife. Okay. To shape this, and again, you might have a sticky spot there. To shape it, get it in a ball, and I'm gonna have to move things around here a little bit. That's so my cutting board doesn't slide. You actually want a surface that is not heavily floured because you want to be able to stretch this and pull this. You want it to grab a little bit on a surface because you're tightening your ball. Now I've managed to deflate this down, and this is not rolling and tightening the way it normally would, but you're pulling it and stretching it. And you're going to put it in a proofing basket. What I didn't tell you earlier about the proofing baskets is you want to make sure that these are nicely floured. Not too heavy, but enough that it's not going to be sticking. Okay, I tend to put them seam side down. Okay, and our other basket. Supposed to kind of catch it and drag it, although this is just skimming, but it wants to stretch a little more to be elastic. Again, if you're worried about your seam, pinch it in. Okay, again. Okay, so we have our 2 loaves. They are ready to be covered. You can cover them with a towel. I'm probably going to go ahead and warm up my bread pillow, if you will, to put a little bit of heat underneath them. They're going to sit for about an hour. They should be crowning up at the top of the proofing basket. And then we're going to put them in our Dutch ovens. That's one thing I didn't mention earlier, but we'll put them in a Dutch oven. I have a 3-quart and a 4-quart that work very well with these. We'll be flipping these over onto our cutting board, and then we're going to use a lame, which is basically a razor blade or a very sharp knife, to cut a steam vent in them and put them in our Dutch ovens. They will have been preheated in the oven at 425. And we'll bake them for about 20 minutes, take the lid off, go for another 5 to 10 minutes. Kind of depends how brown you want them. Okay, we'll be back with you. Okay, it's been about an hour, and looks like our dough has gone through its proofing rise very nicely. I could probably let them go a little bit longer, but I think we'll be fine. Here's what our next steps are. We're going to, we have our Dutch ovens in the oven on preheat, 425. I'm going to bring one of those out, and we're going to put our bread in that. Before we do that, we want to make sure that we have our dough ready. So I'm going to turn this out. I'm going to get my Dutch oven. And although we've got some areas that look like they will split open nicely on their own, we're going to take a lame, make an X, scoop this up very carefully, put it in our Dutch oven so we don't burn our hands, and put the lid on. Put that in the oven, and since I'm doing 2 loaves, I'm going to swap it for the other one. Pop that out. Score it with our lame. Put it in the Dutch oven, and then in the oven. We'll set the timer for 20 minutes. We'll let that go 20 minutes, then take the lid off and perhaps brown it for another 5 to 8 minutes. Or we could leave it in closer to 25 minutes and then take the lid off for the last 5. That should bake somewhere between 25 and 30 minutes. The reason for the Dutch oven is that it holds in the steam, which provides a good crust for your bread. You're going to get some good oven rise, so we'll take a picture of how that looks in the oven when we're taking the lid off, and you can get to see that. We're going to have a look at the at our bread now and maybe uncover them. And it looks like that had some good oven rise. So did that one. Okay, we're going to let them get a little bit browner by cooking them uncovered. Now it's time to take the bread out of the oven, so let me go over there and grab one of the Dutch ovens and see what we got. That looks pretty good, but it's a little on the blonde side for me, so I think I'm going to put it in for a few more minutes. It's now time to have a look at the bread, take it out of the oven. So I'm going to grab the Dutch oven and bring it out. There's a little bit more color to it now, a little browner. So we'll tip it out. Bottom looks good. Top looks good. We've got another, this is my smaller 3-quart Dutch oven, and it does well for a lot of small to medium-sized loaves. And my 4-quart Dutch oven, well used, as you can see, does very nicely. So that one looks good too. That bottom crust is brown, but not burned. And even though we tried to get a crisscross in these with the lame, sometimes the dough has a mind of its own, and it creates the pattern at once. But you get some nice steam splits, and you can see you have some of the pattern of the banneton or the proofing basket on those with a little bit of the flour, so it really has a nice look to it. So I know the loaves are hot, but I think you'll agree that we've got a good oven rise on those. They'll make a nice sandwich-sized slice of bread. And that is today and rustic sourdough. I might actually let them cool and slice into one to show you what the crumb looks like inside the crust. Well, I promised you I would cut open a slice and show you the crumb. So we have a very nice looking crumb, worthy of a little, that is a little slice of bread to eat. And that is our rustic sourdough. Sorry you can't smell it or taste it, but it's good. Nice chewy, crackly crust. Nice soft crumb. Got a winner.